Hello guys, this is Jack, and today we're going to be talking about my most underrated films of 2024. I first want to say happy Thanksgiving as I'm recording this video, and I hope you guys are enjoying the holidays. I think it's also a great time to really unpack a lot of the stuff that I've seen this year. I've seen way too many movies this year. I have a huge addiction with cinema. Now, here's the thing. I want to categorize some of the movies that I saw this year, not in a number order, but more in a genre aspect instead of giving you just number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And I also want to stay away from a lot of the bigger movies that came out this year, like Trap and The Wild Robot, because you already know those movies are really big and expansive and loud, and a lot of people have already seen them. So I want to keep everything enclosed and kind of focus on the films that I saw this year that are actually really worth your time. And you can probably guess that I've seen a bunch of international features, documentaries, just a lot of smaller films that I think really deserve a lot of attention. And on top of that, I think it would be a perfect kind of recommendation type of deal where you can, show your friends this video and be like, oh yeah, Jack recommended a lot of these great films, and you can be the big guy at the party. So yeah, let's get into some of the films that I really enjoyed that are really underappreciated this year. So let's get into it. So I'm actually going to start with something controversial, not entirely controversial, but something that I think people my age would really enjoy, and also someone who is kind of under the influence of sometimes, not entirely, but Oh my God! I want to recommend Aggro Drift by Harmony Korine.
Booths. I was born to kill. It is all I know.
Which is one of those movies that I can't, again, recommend to a lot of mainstream people because it's one of those movies that will turn a lot of people's heads off. But I think Aggro Drift, in concept, is a really interesting film because it deals a lot with the idea of masculinity and how we perceive masculinity in these really wild and hyper scenarios. And it's about this main dude who is part of a cult and wants to move drugs around Florida, and it's completely shot in infrared technology, and it uses a lot of AI and just very hyper intensive visuals to kind of expand the entire story around. And there's a cameo by Travis Scott. There's a lot of really bassy and loud soundtrack, visual, expansive motive. Just a lot of crazy shit is happening, and there's a lot of mojitos and just people twerking. I had a blast watching this, and it's one of those movies you can just drop an edible and just enjoy the whole ride. It's kind of like Metal Gear, but for rappers and influencers. Yeah, so I recommend Aggro Drift just for, those crazy people just like me. Next movie I want to recommend in the international field is All Shall Be Well. I just actually watched this a couple minutes ago. I finished it because I want to talk a little bit about it. It's a Chinese film, and it deals with a family, and one of the family members passes away suddenly, and it's a whole thing where the family has to kind of converge and kind of grow as a family. I don't want to say anything else about the film, but I think it's a really wonderful, quiet, and intimate film that also just, again, deals with family matters and how we kind of grow each other in these really crazy and grieving emotions. And I really enjoyed it. It was really relaxing, chill, a meditation on the family. But it was also kind of one of those movies that made me hungry because a lot of the food in the film is very tasty, and there's a lot of drinking, and I just like those films where people are cooking and making the greatest foods around the world. But that's one movie that I recommend in the international field. And another movie in the international field that I recommend is No Love Lost.
Quel est le résultat?
Metz?
Metz?
Les Beaux-Arts de Metz. Si vous pouviez garder un œil sur ma fille. Elle va se retrouver toute seule ici pour la première fois. Loin de moi. Je vous laisse mon téléphone.
Which is a French movie, a romantic comedy about these two people who converge in this kind of protest setting earlier when they were young, and eventually they fell in love and they had a baby, and the daughter grows up, and one of the family members, the father, is trying to like create like this family aspect with the daughter, but eventually the mother is kind of like in and out of the picture. She comes back and forth into the family, kind of helping the father out, while the father is also kind of like broke, and he's going like to house, kind of like squatting and living in like these houses and trying to like learn how to be like a father figure. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I know the actor was in one of my favorite movies, 120 BPM, which is another French movie from a long time ago, which dealt a lot with the AIDS crisis. And I've really enjoyed like a lot of his acting in some of the films that I've seen him in. And he's really fantastic in this. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of kind of like these weird French slice of life films where there's a lot of like crazy editing and like musical choices that have a lot of emotion and like expression. And I, again, really enjoyed it. And it also felt a lot more like a film where it deals a lot with like time slipping away. But I recommend this film, especially for those who really want to watch something that's like very romantic and like touching. But yeah, that's No Love Lost. And another film that I recommend in the international section of this video is To Kill a Tiger.
जानते हैं ना, आपके गांव में एक घटना घटा है जिसमें एक 13 साल की बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार हुआ है। तो लड़का या लड़की की कोई तो दो करना नहीं रहे।
Which is a documentary about this really tragic and kind of terrifying event dealing with a young girl who was sexually assaulted. And the whole entire town is going after her and going after the family of the victim. This was one of those documentaries that really pissed me off, but it was also, again, dealing with just the idea of people going through like a groupthink situation where, you know, one side of a story is telling like the truth while the other side of a story is telling like the false truth. And it's like converging and like clashing between society. I will never watch this documentary again because of its subject matter, but I was engaged and like seated the whole entire time, and I wanted to know a lot of like the two sides that were like trying to like tell their stories. But I don't have anything else to say. It's on Netflix, so you know, watch it, and viewer discretion advised. So I'm going to continue to speed run a lot of the international films that I saw this year. Another one that I actually saw that it's actually out on Netflix in other countries. I don't know if it's going to come out in the US Netflix yet, but How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies.
ไอเอ็มมันเป็นคนบอก
ก็มันเป็นร่างกายของอาม่าปะเอ็มว่ามันก็เป็นสิทธิ์ของอาม่าที่อาม่าต้องรู้อะ
Is another film that deals with grief and family matters, kind of just like All Shall Be Well. This is kind of an Asian film, a Thai film, that deals with a grandma who's suddenly about to die, and one of the family members is trying to like help her out while also scamming the shit out of her. But you know, eventually, you know, these types of films eventually lead into like love and blossoming, and just like the inevitable ability to, you know, connect with a family member who is going through a hard time. And I really enjoyed this. It's one of those movies that will make your heart like sink and kind of like turn into like a very crying moment. I did cry near the end, but again, I really enjoyed it, and it's one of those movies that will definitely help a lot of people who are going through a lot of these themes. And it's also a good family movie. You know, you can like pop it open with, you know, the family, and they'll have a really good time with it. Continuing on with the international films, Kneecapped.
見到你，我你聽阿比老啲，阿比話。Arca Showboys and Roland 808. Ní ar sy'r argyr bi as rhywlegach. Fyr ciodwy fwy lai grenner, when sy'n blastas, ben na darri sy'n hip-hop.
Is one that I recommend, which is a true story about like this Irish rap group who is growing up in the modern times while their entire country is going through turbulence with their language. And yeah, this movie came and went. I saw this at Sundance back in January, but it had a quiet release during the summer, and I want to like bring it up again because I think it's a really good contender for Best International Feature for the Oscars. And I never knew anything about like the hip hop group partially, but after watching the film, I really got into their music, and their music is really fantastic. They have one like song with one of the main singers from Fontaine's DC, which I always bump to. And again, I think this movie is really terrific. It's kind of like Trainspotting, meets a little bit of like Requiem for a Dream with like the drug stuff, but even then I really felt a lot of like the emotions and connections that were happening throughout the film. But yeah, I can't really say anything too much about it. Just like go in like super, chill out and just, enjoy the movie. It's really, really good, and it has a lot of like great comedic moments. And the next film I recommend in the international field is Caught by the Tides.
如果我算得不错的话，你应该不是本地人。要不要算个命嘛？我看你愁眉苦脸的样子，是不是有点烦心事了？
Which is from Xi Xiangxi. Pronunciation really terrible, but I'm very terrible with that. But this one is really interesting. I've never seen any of his films, and this one's also kind of about a journey, and it's set in China, but it's playing a lot with like autofiction and the emotions of like the main character who's going through like the 90s and then up to the later modern times. And it deals with like technology and how technology continues to grow, while also dealing a lot with like singing, where one of the main characters is really into like singing and has a really like great like vocal background, and she uses her like powers to uplift people around her. And yeah, I was really engaged with it, especially like the documentary and like moments where it was playing a lot with like Chinese history and just like going back and forth with the real like auto fiction genre moments, and then going back to like documentary stuff and going back and forth. I really fucked with it, and I want to see more of his films. I want to like get into like his filmography. But yeah, this one was really good, and we're going to continue with the international films, starting with Infested.
Sure.
Which is a horror film that's actually on Shudder right now, if you have it. But I saw this like way earlier before it came out, and man, this one was just really crazy. It's a French horror film dealing with bugs and just like racism, and those two things don't really like mix together when you like spell it out. But like this film really deals with it, and it's mostly about like these group of people who are like trapped in this apartment complex, and it's filled with like drugs and just people running around, and it's broken down. And this guy, the main character, collects bugs for the black market. And once he gets this like really giant like spider that has like this weird venom that can cause and the spiders to mutate, that's where the film eventually turns into like this really nasty, disgusting body horror film where you have these characters running around the complex trying to catch these bugs, trying to make sure they don't like get bitten by them. And at the same time, the complex is about to be broken down into bits as it's on its last legs. And again, the racism starts to pull in when you see a lot of these tenants who are very emboldened by like their own kind of cultural backgrounds, and their wider counterparts are kind of out of the picture. They aren't like in the apartment complex. They're the only apartment complex that are filled with just minorities and people who are just living life. And once the complex is starting to like break down, these people start to panic and they don't have a place to go. But yeah, like this one was really, really intense and disgusting, and I just enjoyed a lot of like the thrills and horror behind it. This next one is also a part of the international pick category, and I recommend All We Imagine as Light.
ചേച്ചി ഞാൻ
ഇറങ്ങിക്കോ, വീട്ടിൽ കാണാം. സിസ്റ്ററിന്റെ റൂംമേറ്റിനെ ഈടായിട്ട് എന്തൊക്കെയോ ഒരു മാറ്റം ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചാലും അവളൊരു പയ്യനുമായിട്ട് ഇഷ്ടത്തില്ല.
I saw this at Toronto months ago, but it's slowly coming out this year. And this is like India's kind of first film that was in contention for the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year. And this one is really fantastic. I enjoyed a lot of like the emotions and the feelings of both of the characters that are going through a lot of the changes in their lives. And I don't want to go super deep into it, but it deals a lot with these two characters who live in the medical industry and work in the medical industry, and both of them have like this like bond that can't be broken. But once life starts to happen and strange things start to appear into their lives, they have to kind of like commit to their own selves. And I enjoyed it. I think this is Germany's pick for the Oscars, if I remember correctly, because India snubbed it because of their politics and just a lot of the bullshit that's happening around India right now. And it is one of those films that is very critical of like the India landscape and like their history and their current life right now. But I recommend it, especially since it's one of those films that are going to be talked about once the Oscars start to like happen, like the award season. But if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's a really kind of slow burn type of film. So this next one's going to be really interesting because I actually just caught this last week and one of my Aussie friends recommended it because I want to like really get more into like Australian like cinema. There's a lot of like films that I haven't seen over there. But this one's really interesting because it's one of those films that is right up my alley. And I'm going to be talking about Bird Eater.
I really don't think you have to worry.
You don't realise what this is, do you? Tonight we own you. Boys own you. And the harder you kick, the worse it's all going to go down.
Which is kind of like this film about like this group of like kids who are going to a bachelor's party in the forest, and you can probably tell what's going to happen. There's going to be like a lot of like crazy bullshit that happens, and it's also dealing, you know, with drugs and alcohol, but it's also more about like this dynamic and like how these people are going through like their emotions. And one of the main characters of the couple are going through kind of like these hardships, and it isn't fully explained until like halfway through the movie what is going on with their relationship. But I don't want to spoil it. I think it was really fantastic. There's a lot of like crazy visuals that are like happening in between the film, especially near the end where it goes completely psychedelic. It kind of reminded me a bit of like Queer with like those psychedelic moments near the end. But it totally makes sense here because of a lot of the influence and drugs that are like happening across like the entire group. But yeah, I enjoy it. I had some problems with it, but I think that's like minuscule. But yeah, I don't know when this is coming out in the States, but I caught it super early on international Amazon with my VPN. I gotta thank NordVPN. I don't have a sponsorship for them, but yeah, I love them. So this next one is coming from Canada, and it's in French, and it's called Solo. Which is a queer film about this drag queen who is really into drag and eventually falls in love with a competitor who just comes out of the woodwork and tries to steal that drag queen's spot. And I really enjoyed this one. This one was really hilarious and fun and very vibrant and very campy also, with a lot of like the backstabbings that are happening in between the narrative. And I've seen the actor before who plays the main lead. He was in a lot of Xavier Dolan's works and other smaller films that I've seen him in, and he is just on fire and just fantastic throughout. I think it's one of my favorite like underrated performances of the year. It has moments where it feels like the film passages from last year with like the toxic moments and just a lot of like the really crazy queen out moments. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I don't want to like go super detail into it, but where it ends is really incredible and just wild. And it just ends with like one of like my favorite needle drops of the year, dealing with Perfume Genius's Queen. I won't spoil it again, but yeah, I enjoyed this. This was really fun. This next one is also French, but it's in another, you know, country because it's actually in France. This one's last summer.
Des fois, tu ne dis pas que je suis un vieux con.
Jamais.
Théo, lui, me considère comme un vieux con. Hier, il m'a dit que j'avais adopté les filles uniquement pour me donner bonne conscience.
This also deals a lot with dynamics, but in a really strange and hilarious way, as the stepmother is going through a lot of damage and emotions once her stepson from a previous marriage appears into her life and they somehow fall in love. Yeah, this one was really funny because it's one of those films where you have to like take it with a grain of salt because of like the emotions and just like the whole entire story. And just it plays a lot with the dynamics and like how a lot of these like older women really want like the desire to like fall in love with younger people. And yeah, this was just like Drake pedophile moments throughout the entire film. But I've seen the director's film before. She did Fat Girl back in the 2000s, which was another like kind of intense and kind of hilarious and dark and twisted film, which deals a lot of taboo moments. And just, yeah, this one was really, really funny. And again, this director hasn't like directed a film in quite a while, so this was like a nice comeback. But yeah, I don't want to like go super deep into it. Yeah, last summer, hilarious film. And this next one is really interesting because it's set in Africa, and it's kind of a play on like horror, psychological thriller, comedy, and just a lot of like weird genre bending. This one is called Omen.
La pression que t'es en train de te mettre?
Bah ouais. 18 ans. Pour ma mère, c'est compliqué, mais...
Oui, mais ça va aller, mon amour.
And the last time I checked, it's on Mubi. But yeah, this one's really interesting because it deals with a couple. One of them is white, one of them is black. The mother's white, and she's carrying a baby who is part of an African family. And both of them show up at like this family gathering, and it turns out like the people around her are just like, yo, like you're carrying a mixed baby. This is kind of suspect, and this does go against a lot of our heritage. And this turns into kind of a situation where the baby is the curse, and stuff is happening with that. And then it slowly just deviates away from that and turns into kind of like a comedic situation where there's multiple characters in the background who are going through kind of like these crazy scenarios around the African landscape. I don't want to spoil it, but I thought this was like hilarious, crazy. It has bits of like City of God. It has also bits of just other films that I've seen before, and also at the same time, it's very surreal and plays a lot with like magic surrealism. But yeah, this was just hilarious and fun and just very hypnotic. And finally, in the international films that I've seen this year that are underappreciated, this one came and went in terms of wide release, but this one I should like really highlight, because if you're looking for like an action movie that's like nonstop, like blood and gore and just stabbings and just the rage shit, this one's Kill. Yeah, this one's really interesting because it's just set in one location. You're dealing with like these bandits and like cops that are like in the trains, and one of the people on the train commits like a hostage situation, and it's just one of these like situations where, you know, the other side of the train is trying to like fight back, and it's like partially kind of like the Raid, John Wick, and Bullet Train, and mixed with like Indian culture and music and just like crazy like action, bloody, stab, kill. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about this film. If you missed it in theaters, I highly recommend it, especially for those who enjoy a lot of just like blood and gore and just like killings. But yeah, this one was really nice, and it's only like 90 minutes. It's not one of those like Indian films that go like 120 minutes plus, and it does play, you know, with like musical elements. This doesn't have musical elements. It's just straight killing and like just a lot of like blood and gore. But yeah, I enjoyed this one also. And finally, in the international field, I want to like highlight Crossing, which is a Georgian Turkish film from a director that I've seen before. He did one of my favorite films from a couple years ago. Let me actually like look at it real quick because I don't have it like right in front of me. But I think it was, oh yeah, it was And Then We Danced. That one was really, really fucking great. I highly recommend that one.
Bak bunlar birini arıyorlar. Lubunya galiba. Tekla, adı Tekla. Abla yok öyle biri burada. Boş arıyorsun.
Teklas bana რა დაგინეთ? ჩემ დას დავპირდი რომ ვიპოვიდი და სახში დავაბრუნებდი. ისი ბოლო სურვილი იყო.
But Crossing is kind of like his emotional turn, where you have this retired teacher from Georgia who's trying to learn more about her family members, and one of her family members just disappears. She's trans, and she leaves the country of Georgia and goes to Turkey, and the entire time this teacher is trying to like find her in Turkey, and she tags along with this young guy who is connected to this teacher, and both of them go to Turkey, Istanbul, to find their trans niece. And the entire time, it's kind of like a reflective, emotional film dealing with these two characters who are going through kind of these weird changes in life. And eventually they connect with each other through the Turkish culture, either through drinking and dancing and just talking to people around Turkey while also trying to like find their niece. I really thought this was really kind of laid back, chill, and just vibey. I don't have anything like expansive to say about the film, but it's on Mubi if you have the subscription service to Mubi, and it's a really nice time and a really enjoyable film. But yeah, that's like my international picks for my underappreciated films of 2024, and I will be continuing more of like the genre stuff in this video, so let's continue on. So this next category, I'm gonna like tailor it towards young adult and just modern angst. Starting with my first film that I recommend, good one.
This is a regular amount of food.
I didn't even know you ate meat.
Yeah, I thought you were a vegetarian.
I've never been a vegetarian, Dad.
You seem like one, though.
I'm going the speed limit.
You're actually going 5 miles over.
I'm not, and you always go like at least 10 over.
That is my privilege as father.
She's a better driver than you, man.
That's because I taught her.
Damn, that's heavy.
You're joking.
What?
We are hiking all day.
Yeah,
So it's going to be a lot heavier after an hour or 7.
I'm fine.
Which is kind of like a quiet, meditative film about like this daughter who is going to a camping trip in the Catskills and is hanging out with the father and the father's friend. I won't say anything too much in detail about the film, but it's a really quiet and meditative film, once again dealing with just life, death, and just the emotions of life. And I really like the lead in the film. She held herself on her own in terms of just a lot of like the quiet and like tender moments. And again, like I was really like captivated by her performance and just everybody else's performance. Like there's only like 2 other leads in the film, and they're just like going through the forest, camping and hanging out and talking. But yeah, this was a really quiet and like intimate film, and you could probably tell, the young adult performance in the film has a lot of like baggage and like angst boiling up throughout, and she uses like that angst in a different kind of type of way. She doesn't like explode. Instead of she kind of like internalizes a lot of it and kind of like talks it out through the 2 leads in the film. But yeah, that's a good one. So this next one is part of the young adult angst section, and I'm gonna put Blink Twice in here.
He's Slater King.
Everybody say, making memories! Making memories!
You having a good time?
We're having a great time. We're drinking champagne and we're eating amazing food.
So do you think the human sacrifice is before or after dinner?
The legendary parties of Slater King. Not what I thought it was gonna be.
We still have fun. It's just a little different now.
What do you mean?
Phones, please. Wait, for real?
You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do.
Because yeah, it's about young people, but it's also again dealing with feminist backgrounds and just emotions surrounding this enclosed area where one of the main characters gets invited by a rich guy to a private island, and it's kind of like Epstein Island where a lot of fucked up shit is happening. And it's kind of like the film like Promising Young Woman, a little bits of like Get Out and Saltburn. But it also, again, is a commentary about rape culture in very high societal circles. And Lenny Kravitz's daughter, Zoe Kravitz, directs this film, writes it, and stars in it. And yeah, this was really, really solid, actually. Scratch that. She doesn't, like, star in it, but she has kind of, like, her creative emotions applied to the lead character in the film. I thought she was kind of, like, in the moment of the film, but yeah, that was just like my mind going like, yeah, she's in it also as well, but she's not in it. That's like the main character. The main character kind of feels like Zoe Kravitz, but I'm actually talking about the other lead in the film, Channing Tatum, which Zoe and like Channing, they fell in love with each other during the making of this film and they broke up. But yeah, you can probably tell like this kind of is kind of like their lives a little bit. But yeah, I won't spoil it. It's really good, and it's one of the most creative debuts that I've seen this year. So this next one is part of the young angst situation type of deal with Riddle of Fire.
Hello. Who are you? Oh, just a fire fairy. I think she's cursed. Maybe she's blessed. Maybe she's both.
I won't say anything else about it, but I did write down that it kind of reminded me a bit of the Florida Project, but with like a Safdie's Brothers touch. And yeah, I will say that wholeheartedly. So keep that in mind. And it also is kind of like Super Babies. Won't elaborate, it's just the vibe. So this next one's really interesting because I caught this like really early in the year, but this one escaped my mind and then it came back once I started to read the review that I did not too long ago. But this one's The Sweet East.
Excuse me? You sure you're in the right place? Feel certain I've never seen you at one of these affairs before.
This is another like young angsty film dealing with a young woman who flees from her school trip and starts hanging out with a bunch of Nazis and crazy political leaders. And it's a commentary and a satire on modern society and how absurd it is. And Ao and Jimmy Harris just appears out of nowhere as kind of like random versions of society, like the fractions of society. Some of them are far left, others are far right in the political spectrum, and they're going through just like crazy ass shit. And there's a lot of like fucked up like scenarios that are happening in between like the overall story. And yeah, this was just really funny. And Talia Ryder, I've seen her before. I'm trying to remember the movie she saw I was in a long time ago. I think it was like Nothing Really Matters or shit, I forgot the name of it, but it was like a movie about like abortion, and it came out early in 2020, and I really dug that film, and her performance in that was really, really good. And here she just goes full comedic, kooky, crazy, manic pixie dream girl character, and yeah, this was just really funny. If I remember correctly, it's on Hulu right now, so if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. And this next one that I'm gonna like throw into like the angsty young adult genre classification is The People's Joker.
When I look back on my life, before going jokeman to harlequin, so to speak, I wasn't even sure I existed. It's like blurry, cracked mosaic of all these gender revelations. You mean she's a he?
This one is really interesting because it's one of those films that I can't really recommend for everyone because it's singular vision. But Vera Drew directed this film with very, really hilarious and kind of funny emotions. And this one is mostly a satire on the Joker. The character himself, who is kind of like a queer icon. I can't really explain it, but this film kind of goes super deep into why the Joker feels like a queer icon. But yeah, and at the same time, this film is also shot in a way where it feels very low budget. There's a lot of animation, a lot of creative backing behind the film, and it feels a little bit low budget, but if you really go into it with open arms, you'll find a lot of the emotions throughout the film because it deals with like trans acceptance and gender norms and how absurd it is. And it also plays a lot with political themes. And yeah, like I thought this movie was just really hilarious and funny and very vibrant, and I had a blast watching it. So yeah, and on top of that, it did feel a little bit kind of like a Tim and Eric sketch, but yeah, like this was really, really good. And I recommend it for those who are really open to just different movies. So this next one is on Mubi, and it's also a part of the young teenage angst situation. This one's This Closeness.
Looks different than the pictures. Sadder.
It's just for the weekend, so it's fine.
You think he's home? Sorry.
I won't go into the details of this film, but it's dealing with like roommates and how a third roommate appears out of the woodwork and tries to steal the spotlight of another roommate, and they're all going through these kind of like crazy emotions. And one of them, the roommate that appears into the room where they're living in, is kind of like an incel and isn't entirely attached to society and is trying to go through the open baggage of being kind of an outsider. And I enjoyed it, and it kind of reminded me of like my college life, especially some of the roommates that I've hung out with. Some of them are kind of like detached from society, but this also reminded me a bit of like the 2010s early mumblecore films where there's a lot of like heady dialogue and like fast like dialogue happening, but it feels real and lived in. And I love the performances and all the kind of emotions that are happening in the film. But yeah, that's this closeness. It's on Mubi, and I recommend that film. And this final film that I recommend in the teenage angst and young adult angst genre is Sometimes I Think About Dying.
Not bad. I'd love to introduce you all to the newest member of our little family. This is Robert.
Hello. Hey. Fran, right?
Hey, Fran. Sorry. But scared ya. I'm sneaking up on people. Booga booga.
From you can tell with the title, it's about a main character who thinks about dying all the time and is very intensive and emotional with the social interactions that she has with the people around her. And Daisy Ridley, I haven't seen anything else from her aside from, you know, the Star Wars movies. And there's another one where she did this year where she was playing a real life person and it was a sports drama. But here, she fully commits the idea of avoiding social interactions and just being a very reclusive throughout the film. And her performance is very, very, very quiet, meditative, and understated. And I enjoyed it. It gave me really good vibes, and it also plays, again, a lot with the emotions that are happening in our real life, especially with young adults. And yeah, I enjoyed this one. This one was really nice and really quiet. And it also has a really great monologue near the end by one of the actresses in the film, which really sums up the entire film as a whole. But yeah, I recommend this one. And that pretty much does it with some of the films that I saw in this section genre of teenage angst and young adult. We're going to continue with the other categories that I recommend in the underappreciated films of 2024. So let's continue on. These next two categories are going to be one about documentaries and the other one about animated films that I've saw that are really underappreciated this year. Starting with Gasoline Rainbow.
Let me ask Nicole. I like the van, it's pretty cool. Are you just looking for cool sights and stuff? Kinda, yeah.
Whoa, look at the fucking color of the sky over there. It looks like a Bob Ross painting, bro.
Bob Ross was 7'3", man.
You're fucking lying. No, he's not that tall.
They're gonna have a party at this place called the End of the World at some beach or something.
Which is a documentary about a group of kids who are escaping from their teenage lives to become adults in this really strange and weird time right now. But I thought this documentary was really interesting because it goes deep into the lore of middle-class life while also exploring the depths of America. And I thought this documentary was just really fun. There's a lot of engaging moments where it shifts between narrative documentary, blend, realism, surrealism style of filmmaking. And there's a whole overreaching narrative throughout the film where a lot of these teenagers are trying to find a place to live, and that's like the gist of the documentary. The rest of the documentary is just them fucking around, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot about the middle side of America. And to flip genders, let's talk about the girls, because this documentary, Girl State, is basically about politics, but with female perspective.
Something in the air, and it's politics.
This is actually a spin-off of the original Boys State documentary, which dealt a lot with politics and how men perceive politics as a way for their escapism with masculinity. And this is a flip side of femininity. And I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot about how misogyny works in our political system, especially if you are a woman. I'm not a woman, but I get a lot of the stuff that is happening throughout this documentary, and it was really interesting to see all of the perspectives, whether conservative or liberal, not. And this next documentary is really interesting because it deals a lot with children and how we procreate children.
Baby dust.
Baby dust. Thank you so much.
Sperm World is a documentary about a group of subjects who are trying to find a way to make a baby with their sperms. And it goes super deep into the industry and how it can be commodified and manipulated easily without unmanaged checked powers. And I thought this was a really interesting documentary. It's also very hilarious. There's a lot of moments where some of the subjects are going through like really crazy, hilarious moments, and others are going through really hard and tough situations. I thought this was really interesting. And I've seen the director's documentaries before. Some Kind of Heaven was another one that I really enjoyed from them. But yeah, I recommend this one just for the subject alone. And the last documentary that I recommend is The Truth versus Alex Jones.
There is a reported school shooting in Connecticut. And I said, they are going to come after our guns, look for mass shootings. And then magically it happens. This is staged.
This one's a really interesting one because Alex Jones, the subject at hand, is a controversial figure. He spearheaded InfoWars, which is a very far-right and extremist channel dealing with conspiracy theories. And this whole documentary is his trial surrounding the shooting that happened a couple years ago, mass school shooting, which turned into a media spectacle and caused Alex Jones to falsify and create a conspiracy theory around the narrative of the mass shooting. And he was found guilty for, manipulating the public about it. And this caused a lot of damage in our institutions and our media. So yeah, this dude can rot, and I'm glad he's guilty, and I'm also glad that InfoWars is now part of The Onion. So yeah, let's get it, boy. So I'm going to leave you with 2 animated films to watch, just for pure measures. Oran and the Dark is a really interesting one because this is written by Charlie Kaufman, who wrote a bunch of crazy adult films in the past several years of his lifetime.
My name's Orion, and I'm afraid. Afraid of what, you want to know? It's most things, to be candid. Girls in general. Being responsible for my team losing. Giving the wrong answer in class. Richie Panichi.
Good night, Orion.
But all the things I'm afraid of, I'm most afraid.
But this takes a lot of his existential crisis fears and anxieties of his original films, but then he kind of applies it with the animated form of media with Oran in the Dark. I don't want to spoil too much about this film, but this is one of the most heaviest and kind of intense animated films that you'll watch this year. And it's still played up like a kid's film, but it's not a kid's film. It's actually for adults also as well. But yeah, I'm not going to say anything about this one. This one was really, really interesting. And my final film on my list, and just in the animation field in general, I have to recommend Flow. Again, don't want to spoil too much about this film, but it deals with cats and other animals that are surviving a natural disaster across their landscapes. And I thought this was a really terrific and intense film, dealing with just like survival, and it also feels like a video game with some of the emotional imagery that's happening throughout the film. And yeah, like this was a really interesting one. It almost teared me up a little bit in some sections, but that's probably because I really love cats. But yeah, that's Flow. And you know what? That's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe. Share it to everybody around you. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays. God bless. Cheers, fellas.
Oh, Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!